Continuing with the topic of healing, in this video, I want to speak about the topic of fasting. This is something Jesus spoke about right after he healed a boy who had been through quote-unquote demonic possession. As I've concluded in the previous video, this demonic possession is mainly the cognitive function of the mind. What might be behind the layer of reality that we can perceive? What might be in this layer of quote-unquote spirit? These demons are created by our cognitive function, by negative emotions, which might translate into thought forms. We don't really know how these work. Of course, I've concluded all of this because of some of the modern evidence that we have in terms of psychedelic experiences, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. People relate to these kind of imaginary experiences or hallucinations where they see demons or they see hell and they swear they've been in hell and things like that. It all seems to be some sort of creation of the mind, but it comes with a larger question. What is the mind? Where everyone thinks that it generates in your brain and you have hallucinations based on your experiences. But what evidence is suggesting also is that this does not happen in the brain, because some of these people have these experiences after death, after clinical death, when their brain shouldn't be making any sort of hallucinations. So it goes way deeper into the evidence, and I'm going to be speaking about that in the third part of the outline where I lay out all the evidence. But for now, we have to conclude this is just negative emotions, negative cognitive functions that create thought forms which people back in the day who could see behind the layer of reality may have perceived as demons. This would be Jesus, this would be Buddha, this would be some other people who can see, the psychics who can see behind this layer, right? Okay, so what happened was that Jesus healed this boy, and he said something about fasting. So while in closed doors, after the boy was healed, the story goes that the disciples asked him, people around him asked him, how come the disciples couldn't heal the boy? And then Jesus replied, this can only come out by prayer. Specifically, he said, quote unquote, this kind can come out only by prayer. Mark 9:29. Now, in the King James Version of the Bible, it includes prayer and the fasting. They probably removed fasting because there's no true basis on why fasting was important. So they probably just removed fasting, and then it was this kind can come out only by prayer in the way they understand it, like just asking God for it, I guess. But as I've worked in this study, prayer for Jesus was some sort of ritual where you would have to go deep inside yourself and just tap into this quote unquote kingdom of heaven, where you would ask the Father with quote-unquote shameless audacity. It was, as I've been saying, and as I will say all over this, it was mentalism. He was speaking about truly focusing and some sort of mental discipline. This was his quote-unquote prayer. Now he says prayer and fasting. So this requires a more complicated ritual than the disciples were able to perform. So when we look into fasting, we can see that fasting, and we know that fasting was an important tradition in some other religious practices or customs. 500 years before the times of Jesus, there was the Buddha, and fasting was a very prominent feature of his teachings, of his practices, of the whole cultural belief in asceticism. And so begs the question, what is the deal about fasting? Well, before the Buddha, in Hinduism, fasting was a very prominent practice as well. So it seems that fasting somehow connects us to divinity. Now, one of the reasons why fasting is believed to be important is because it's an act of sacrifice. You sacrifice yourself, you sort of punish yourself in some way in order to achieve grace with God. That's one of the ideas of fasting. We can see fasting also in the Old Testament. It was a very common practice to fast for certain days, for certain periods, coming to certain holidays, or in the case of Hinduism, it was specific days for specific gods, etc. But now, if we look rationally at fasting, we have two recorded individuals that have some sort of historical proof to have existed and who have gone through fasting to gain some sort of enlightenment. And now this is Jesus Christ of Nazareth and Buddha, Siddharta, as I mentioned. So if we look at the story of the Buddha, we can see that he actually practiced fasting in a very extreme way. When he set upon to go into gain some sort of divine connection, he would say things like, I'm gonna fast until either I get some sort of connection with divinity or until my veins dry. So that was his mindset. It is recorded in the scriptures that he will go through this extreme fasting, and later on his path, he gained new knowledge and he came to new conclusions about this, because fasting indeed was something very extreme. It was practiced in very extreme ways by some of the Hinduist circles. So he would say, you know what, this might not be a very good idea, and then he would start the practice of only eating what would be offered to him. There's a story that some lady saw him, suffering through the fasting, and she offered some rice to him, and he felt better, and so on and so on. So he relaxed a little bit in his fasting practice, and that's when he gained this idea of reaching a balance between extreme fasting and doing the sacrifice. But the story goes on that one day he sat down below a tree. He started fasting, and out of nowhere he got this extreme experience. It's a very specific experience that relates some themes that have been found in some of these altered states of mind that I've been speaking about all along. It seems that he had some sort of hallucination, which, as I mentioned, there's more to hallucinations than some creation from the mind. And he saw the devil. This is in the Buddhist scriptures. He saw the devil, or their understanding of the devil, and the devil sort of challenged Siddharta. And he put a set of tests on him, and he overcame this test by the devil. Then he came back from the hallucination, and bam, he was enlightened. He became the Buddha. Of course, there's more to this story, but basically that's the gist of it. I will be going into full detail of Buddhism in the second part of the outline. Now, for this one, I'm speaking about Jesus Christ. So, if we look at the story of Jesus, it is very, very similar to the story of the Buddha. The difference is that Jesus did not sit down below a tree, and the precursor to his fasting, the one that is mentioned in the Bible, is simply baptism. The baptism by John the Baptist. He was baptized, then he saw the quote-unquote Holy Spirit, then he went into the desert for 40 days into fasting. And after these 40 days, that's when we have the story from Jesus meeting the devil. The snake that challenged him, that challenged Jesus into the worldly power, into all of these. But this encounter with the devil is very interesting, because it's very similar to the one from the Buddha. It's not about the devil just trying to overly destroy them. The devil is tempting them. Like, the devil has an agenda. The devil wants them to fall upon worldly temptations and to not achieve this divinity, to kind of ground them into the world. So there's a very archetypal aspect of the devil in these stories, but I will be going into this further. But right now, so Jesus overcomes this test and comes on the other side, and he said, Satan, get behind me. And then Jesus overcomes the enlightened being that he is set up to be for the rest of the scriptures. Now, if we look at this story, we do not have anything before this of Jesus. We do have some of the birth of Jesus, and we have some story about his childhood in one of the Gospels. It's very briefly, it's non-transcendental, and we have nothing until this point. And then after this point is when we have the whole story of the scriptures. Now that is very intriguing, to say the least. What happened? What was the story of Jesus before this event? It's the same story as the Buddha, and the Buddha had no baptism. So it would be a good idea to wonder what is the role of baptism and why is it so important for Christians. This has mainly to do with tradition, with custom, with misinterpretations about the whole ritual about the water. This is only a tradition. When Jesus spoke directly about it, he only said about connecting with the Spirit. You have to be born in spirit. You have to be born above. This is what he said about baptism. It has got nothing to do with water, and the importance that the church puts on it is merely tradition. I will be going fully into detail into the baptism topic in another chapter. This is a big part of my research. But in any case, right now I'm discussing the issue about fasting. So Jesus does give us another clue about fasting in one of the passages, and I'm going to read right now. So it says, "Then John's disciples came and asked him, 'How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?' Jesus answered, 'How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, then they will fast.'" Matthew 9:14. Okay, so let's analyze this passage. Now, Jesus is relating to himself as the bridegroom, and his disciples are the guests. This has got nothing to do with it. This is only an allegory, a metaphor for showing that relationship between him and disciples. So he is the bridegroom, and the guests are the disciples. So he's saying, how can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? Implying that he is with the disciples. He is with them at the moment. He goes on, the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, then they will fast. So he's saying that there will be one day when he is not going to be with the disciples, and then they will fast. He's talking about him dying, because he always knew that that was something that he had to do. So he said, one day I'm going to die, and then the disciples are going to fast in order to connect with me. So what is he implying? Well, he is implying that fasting connects you to that other world, to the world of the dead, to that realm, to that place of quote-unquote spirit that you go when you pass from this life. So fasting connects you with it. So now if we keep making the associations, we know that fasting triggers a hallucination in those who are to be enlightened, according to most of the historical evidence that we have with the Buddha and Jesus. So how does fasting connect us with this world of the dead? Through a quote-unquote hallucination. Well, it's the same way that any altered state of mind experience would do it. What other things connects us with these realms? Well, high fever. If you have a high fever, you will start to hallucinate. People who are dying have reported to have been seeing hallucinations. They see, elderly people who are at homes or who are in hospitals. They often see, their loved ones around, loved ones who have already passed to the other side. They start to have these hallucinations. So he's saying fasting is one way that you can connect with this world of spirit through this hallucination. So if we think about fasting is putting your body to the extreme. Like the Buddha said, I'm gonna be here until my veins dry. It's a traumatic experience to the body. So the body would go into a process of dying. And as these altered states of mind suggest, when the body starts to die is when these hallucinations are triggered. So my take on this, and this is something that I expand on the third part of the outline, I've done this research already, is that fasting, when done in extreme ways, can trigger a near-death experience, therefore triggering the hallucination that a lot of people believe comes from the pineal gland, giving you that dose of DMT, which triggers that hallucination, which might be an actual contact with that other world, that world of spirit that Jesus often spoke about. And perhaps this is also the reason of many of the quote-unquote visions that are all throughout the Bible and the scriptures. Perhaps there's something more to it. Now, one of the things that I want to clear out is when I use the word hallucinations, I'm not referring to only creation from the brain, a personal thing. I'm talking about an actual experience, because we don't really know what hallucinations are. We don't really know where dreams occur. As I mentioned, I don't know if here or in another video, it's a lot of these hallucinations in near-death experiences come after the brain is clinically dead, when there is no energy in the brain to create a hallucination. So a lot of people are starting to believe that consciousness actually originates somewhere else. So this is an experience from the consciousness. Now we start to get a bit more esoteric with this, but we have to look at it rationally as well. So when I say hallucination, I'm not dismissing the importance of the experiences, because it might be that hallucinations are actually a very real look into what lies behind the bill of reality that we commonly perceive. If you're on the path of finding the truth about reality and our purpose as humans on Earth, the information that I have to share concerns you. After a lifetime of research in philosophies ranging from Buddhism to the occult, I've encountered themes and patterns along some baffling information that is beginning to be seriously studied by science. Our Rational Divine Outline, The Ghost of Jesus, is the first iteration of this project, where I analyze the message of Jesus without dogmatism, fanaticism, or religious bias. You can find my work available on Amazon on the link below. If you find this work valuable, consider subscribing, sharing, and following me on social media, as it'll help others in the same path to find this information. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.